So now we're going to actually start into your case for this lecture, and what we're going to do is walk through an actual business scenario for our fake company. And what I'm going to ask you to do is what you've been training and learning how to do some risk analysis, choose a couple of new controls, and we'll talk about what those controls will be, and write those controls up for peer review. So let's go ahead and start into the particulars of the case. So day 0, life is normal. This is talking about yesterday's status. We have a financial services application service provider who provides credit clearance software for services of 20 large banks worldwide. And keep in mind, this is a subsidiary of our fake company that does financial services. So that's what we're talking about here. We provide the platform and the software, and the bank's people operate the system. This is how things work. So we are an application service provider, fairly standard model. Our database administrators have access to banking data. There's really no way to avoid that, since to support the application, we have to be able to have access to the databases. That's just the way it works. Our banking customers love us, and they trust us to do that with sufficient controls in place. Network security, database security, and application security are all things that we do, since we're hosting the web servers, since we're hosting the databases, since we're hosting all of the things that our banking customers are using. That's all of our responsibility. All of our customers audit us. If you recall, I mentioned earlier, one of the audit scenarios that I encounter more and more often these days is business partners, people that we're working with and sharing data with, auditing how we treat their data. In this scenario, each of those customers constantly audits us in order for them to be comfortable sharing banking information with our personnel. So the standards they use are, since these are worldwide banks, all over the map they use ISO, they use the British standard that ISO came from, various different things. What we do is respond to each of those individually. Let's talk about what's important to those customers. Well, there's the information itself. The information in the databases includes names, date of births, financial details about your accounts, credit card info, and social security numbers for U.S. customers, other identifiers for other non-U.S. customers. Those things are important to our banking customers because they are bound by regulation to protect it. And they want to know that every person with access to that data is in compliance with certain criteria. They want to know that they've been background checked. They want to know that they're qualified to do the work. They want to know that they're specifically authorized to access that data. So these aren't perfect controls, but they're controls that get us to a place where we're more comfortable with having us as a third party access banking information. Additionally, they want to know that there are distinct separation of duties. Remember the control that we talked about earlier, the specific one, AC5, that talks about separation of duties. They insist upon that control as being a part of the way we operate. They want to know exactly how network access to web servers, application servers, and the database is protected. They want to know what those physical controls might look like, what the logical controls might look like. What do your firewalls do? What firewalls are you using? What do the rule sets look like? So they're very interested in making sure that we've done the job properly. And they want to know who has access to what. Essentially, what are the lists of people who can look at this data, and how do those lists change? And they're going to want to audit all of those things. So today, as of 2 p.m., things are getting interesting. One of our financial subsidiaries, the one that we're talking about, has purchased a company from the country of Georgia whose primary business is outsourced programming. While the subsidiary still has local operational control of daily tasks, final decisions now are made by a new management team in Tbilisi. Now, this is actually often the case in acquisitions. Things don't go quite the way you might expect. When this particular acquisition was contemplated, the holding company said, hey, this Tbilisi management team are sharp folks. Part of the reason we're acquiring this company, aside from this contract programming issue, is we'd like them to be running operations. So even though the acquisition was of the foreign company, management is actually going to be coming back the other direction. For economic reasons, we'll be combining management networks and IT support. Again, this is a concept we talked about earlier today in terms of how are we going to make the best economic hay from this acquisition, this thing we're doing. So that's our 2 o'clock event. As of 4:30, things change pretty rapidly. The CEO of the financial subsidiary decides that Tbilisi DBAs are way less expensive, so we're going to use them when we can. In fact, the Tbilisi data center looks like a great disaster recovery site for the U.S. operation. As you might think, these are, again, concepts that we talked about a little earlier. The idea that this great physical separation makes it a very tempting target as a place to fail to, and potentially cheap labor and various different other places, or differential labor costs might cause management to think about moving that kind of resource. So that's a 2.5 hour period. We went from your stuff is yours, run it like you would, to actually I think we're going to change things. Any of you that have ever been through an acquisition at any level of the company will recognize these behaviors. So your homework. We're going to do a basic risk analysis and control recommendation for a new business environment, this thing that we're walking through. Given the case details that we're presenting, I'd like you to prepare and post for peer review information assurance controls for access to sensitive client banking information by HMC employees. If we look at the changes that we just saw proposed to the organizational structure, you might imagine that there are changes required to our standard control set. And how access control is handled administratively. Consider those concepts, and I'd like you to at least choose a limited set of controls that you think would be the most interesting ones that you need to change, and post that for peer review on the Coursera site. For the assignment, I've got a few suggestions for things to think about. One, and this is important, you're the CISO. You're actually expected to lead. You're not expected to be purely reactionary. So take a leadership position. What that means to you, I'll leave open to question, but for me, a leadership position means often helping guide the organization in a better direction. It may not, it's not usually telling the administration or your boss that he's wrong and he needs to rethink. It's usually there's a better way, and helping guide that. So that's an important concept to think about as you're preparing your response. And refer to the what's important to our customers slide for inspiration in that area. When in doubt about some detail of how the company operates, if as you're doing your analysis you come across a roadblock, well, I don't know how the company deals with hand sanitation. I can't imagine that becoming a part of this analysis, but let's just use it as an example. Make it up. I've not given you enough details to have an all-encompassing view of every single thing that this company does. When you do make it up, document your assumption. Just tell me and your peers, this is what I decided the company does for hand sanitation, and here's how it applies to the controls that we're going to put in place. Don't get hung up on super complicated control descriptions. When it comes to controls, short is good. You want to make them clear. You want to make them short. Any control that looks like a paragraph is way too long. Folks will not put all of the pieces together. You will have crafted a beautiful piece of prose that describes everything you ever want people to do in this area, and nobody will do it because they won't have read through past the first sentence. So keep it short. Unlike some of the classes you may have taken, there's no single right answer. In fact, most of the answers, including my own, would be partly wrong. It's just the way this industry works. Good answers, on the other hand, are well justified and considered. Bad answers are ones that you essentially spit on the page with no explanation. What I want to hear from each of you is not just your solution, but how you justify it, what you thought about, how you took the concepts that we've talked about and applied them to your actual solution. With that, I think we're finished with week 1. Good luck with the assignment, and I will see you all next time.